All right, Algebra 1. First of all, make sure that you have your Algebra 2223 review submitted before we start this so that you can get your points. And then we'll watch or I'll go over all the problems. You guys can watch this. And if you still have questions, just let me know and I can answer those questions individually. But I'm just going to go over all these problems here. So let's get started. So the first one. All we are doing here with numbers 1 and 2 is factoring out a GCF. So if you remember your GCFs, all we need to do is we look at our numbers and we say, okay, 25 and 5, what is the biggest number I can take out of 25 and 5? And that is a 5. And then we look at our variables, and I say, look at my x's. What's the smallest power for x? And that is a 3, so x to the third. And then for y's, the smallest power for y, remember if there's nothing here, it's a 1. So the smallest power for y is just y, or y to the first. Next, we can't just find the GCF, we actually have to divide that out. So we're going to do 25 divided by 5 is 5. And then if we started with x to the fourth, remember that means there were 4 copies of x, and we took 3 of them out, so there is 1 copy of x left. Next, we had a y, but we took that y out, so there are no y's left in that first one. Plus, next one, 5 divided by 5 is 1, so you can put a 1 there if you want to, but we don't need to. X to the third, we took an x to the third out, so there's no x's left. And then y squared, we divided one of them out, so there's still 1 left. So let me go back to my earlier statement, and I said 5 divided by 5 is 1. We don't have to write that. The only time that you do need to write that is if there would be nothing left over here. Okay, so if we could take out the x to the third and the y squared, and there was nothing left here, we would have to put that 1 from 5 divided by 5. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right, there's the first one, factoring out the GCF. One more of these. So 28 and 24. So look at this and say, all right, well, what's the biggest number I can divide out of both of those? And that is a 4. Okay, the biggest number I can divide out of 28 and 24 is 4. So then I go on to my variables. Let's start with b. So b squared, I have b squareds in both of these. So the smallest power is a 2. And next, look at the a's. Well, I have an a to the third here, so some people might say, well, the smallest power is 3. But if there is no a term over here, we don't include that in our GCF. And if you remember back when we did that, the reason why is because there is basically like an a to the 0 in here. We just don't write it. Remember, a to the 0 is 1, and 1 times 28 would be 28. So there is technically an a to the 0 in there. We just don't write it because it's not the simplest way to write it to include that. It's simpler if we don't include that. So the smallest power would be a to the 0, which means we're not including any a's. Okay, so now we're ready to divide it out. 28 divided by 4 is 7. B squared, I started with a b squared, I took a b squared out, so no b's left, plus 24 divided by 4 is 6. I started with b squared, but I took the b squared out. Started with a to the third. I didn't take any a's out, so I'm left with a to the third. So there's your final answer for number 2. And again, you're going to have 2 problems just like this on your quiz tomorrow. They're both factoring out a GCF, and that is what you'll need to do. Not just find the GCF, but then factor that out. All right, next, factor completely. One thing I want to point out to you, I know a lot of you have been doing this, but not everybody. These need to have a table to get full credit. And I will be checking your work on your quiz tomorrow. You will have to do the work and write it on a piece of paper and turn that in order to get credit for these. Because if you don't have the table for these problems, you will not get credit for them. So make sure that you do that. Okay, so what we're looking for is, first of all, we look for a GCF. There is no GCF here. We have the number out front here as a 1. There's no n's, so no GCF. So now we go to our table. We say, all right, I need 2 numbers. Okay, 2 numbers that will multiply to give me 56 and add to give me negative 15. Okay, so we think about this, and you can run through some factors of 56, right? Like 2 and, what is it, 28, 23? Yeah, 28, 2 and 28. So like, since the middle number is negative, that means both of our terms have to be negative. So like negative 2 times negative 28. Well, negative 2 times negative 28 is 56, but what happens when we add these together? Negative 2 plus negative 28. Well, we don't get negative 15, so that one is out. So we're just going to do our table until we get one that works. Once you find one that works, you don't have to continue the table because you already have your work completed. So you run through some more factors. 3 doesn't go in. 4 and something. 5 doesn't go in. 6 doesn't go in. But then 7, eventually you get to set negative 7 times negative 8 gives you 56. Negative 7 plus negative 8 gives you negative 15. All right, so those are the two factors. Now, how do we write our answer? Well, we come back over here. Both of these will start with n, okay? And the reason why they're both starting with n is because that's how we get our first term. N times n is n squared. All right, so both of your sets of parentheses will start with n because that's how we get our first term. N times n is n squared. How do we get 56? Well, from a negative 7 times a negative 8. We could also get that from a positive 7 times a positive 8, but if we add a positive 7 and a positive 8, that would give us a positive 15, and you can see here we were looking for a negative 15, okay? So that's why they both had to be negative. All right, so this is what you need to show me for these problems. To get full credit, you have to show me these things. You have to show me this is your answer right here, okay, which on your quiz you're going to answer A, B, C, or D, but this part over here, your table, this is what you're showing to get your work, or to get credit for the work, to get full credit. All right, so you have to make sure you're showing me these tables. Next, same thing here. We need to find two numbers. We have no GCF. First of all, let me back up a step. If we look at this and we say, all right, can I take a number out? No, there's no number that we can divide out. Can't take an x out because the 6 doesn't have an x. So then we say, okay, I need a number that will two numbers that multiply to give me negative 6 and add to give me the middle number. If you remember here, this is a 1. So 6 has two sets of factors, 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. So this is a negative, so that means one of our numbers would have to be negative. And if you remember, the middle number here, since this is positive, that means our bigger numbers have to be positive. So if we put our negatives here, negative 1 plus 6, well, that doesn't give us 1, that gives us 5. So that one's out. And the next one, negative 2 plus 3 gives us 1. That's what we were looking for. That is our correct answer. So let's put it in our answer now. So we have our two sets of parentheses. What do they both start with? X in this case, because we're trying to get x squared, so x times x. One is a negative 2, one is a positive 3. You can have those switched. This could be x plus 3, x minus 2, and that would still be correct, but there you go. That's what you need to show. All right, number 5. This one does have a GCF, and if you remember what I told you when we went over these notes, whatever is keeping this first term from being a variable squared, whether it's x squared, in this case n squared, or v squared, r squared, whatever, that is your GCF. That's what needs to come out. So what is keeping this from being n squared? Well, it's a 5, so we take a 5 out. Remember, your first term has to be the variable squared, whatever the variable they're using for that problem, squared. X squared, y squared, a squared, b squared, whatever it is, that's what your first term has to be. So let's divide this 5 out from everything now. 15 divided by 5 is 3. N minus 50 divided by 5 is 10. Now, a lot of times people will say, you know, can I just start right from the beginning because 50 is 5 times 10 and then 5 plus 10 is negative 15? There's a couple reasons why that's not true. One of them is because, first of all, this would have to be a positive 50, and it's not in order for you to get that. But the other thing is we had a GCF that had to come out. So now we need to do our table. So two numbers that will multiply to give me negative 10 and add to give me a negative 3. So again, 10 only has two factors. Negative 1, well, that would be backwards. Oops, didn't get my eraser there. 1, negative 10 times 1, or negative 5 times 2. And again, I knew that the bigger numbers had to be negative because my middle number was negative. Okay? So whenever you have a negative number for your last term, your signs have to be different, one positive and one negative. How do you know which one's positive and which one's negative? The bigger number matches the middle sign. Okay, I'll say that a bunch of times because I want to make sure you understand that. So negative 10 plus 1 gives us negative 9. Is that what we were looking for? No, we're looking for negative 3, so that's out. Negative 5 plus 2. And again, guys, you could do this on your calculator. If you're not very good with the mental math, with your adding and subtracting of integers and multiplying and dividing integers and stuff like that, use your calculator. You're allowed to use a calculator on the test, on the quiz, whatever. So use it. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10. Negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3. That's what we were looking for. So let's put this in our final answer. N minus 5, right? Here's a negative 5, so n minus 5. N plus 2. And that's our final answer, right? No, because we forgot our 5, right? This greatest common factor that's out front, that has to be part of your answer. Don't forget that in your answer because that will be incorrect answer. You'll lose a point. So make sure you have your GCF there as part of your answer. Okay, number 6. No GCF. Our first term is a variable squared, so we can just jump right into our table. 32 and 12. Since our last number is positive, that means our signs have to be the same, either both positive or both negative. How do we know which one it is? Again, we always look to our middle sign to answer that second question. Since this is positive, that means they're both positive. So what two numbers will multiply to give me 32 and add to give me 12? Let's think about it for a second. Hopefully you got to 4 times 8. 4 times 8 is 32. 4 plus 8 equals 12. That is my correct answer. Now, as you can see in this table, I only used one of them. I didn't go through 2 and 16. I didn't go through, I guess that would be the only other option, but I didn't go through, or 1 and 32. I didn't go through other options here, okay? And you don't have to. As soon as you get your answer, this is you showing your work. That's all I need to see. Move on to writing down your answer. So x, we have it a positive 4, so x plus 4, x plus 8, final answer, and we are done. And those could be switched. You could have x plus 8 first, x plus 4 second. Number 7. Okay, we do have another GCF here. We have a 7 out front that needs to be divided out. So let's divide the 7 out. What are we left with? Well, the first term is x squared minus 7 divided by 7 is 1. So you could put a 1 there if you want, or you could just put an x. Minus 21 divided by 7 is 3. So 210 divided by 7 would be 30. Okay, and again, use your calculator. Okay, here we go. My table. Two numbers that multiply to give me negative 30 and add to give me a negative 1. Since my last number is negative, that means that my numbers have to be opposite in sign, one positive and one negative. Since my middle number is negative, that tells me the bigger number has to be negative. So I know that this is negative 6 times 5. But again, you can run through some other ones, 2 and 15, 3 and 10. But eventually you'll get to negative 6 plus 5 is a negative 1. Negative 1, there we go. So there is our final answer. Let's write it in our problem over here. So make sure you bring down the 7. X minus 6. X plus 5. There we go. Okay. One more of these before we get into our dots. Difference of two squares. So again, first term is a 1a squared, so that's good. Now we just need to look at 110. Negative 110. And the middle number is negative 1. So 110 is a big number. Some of you might be looking at that thinking, I don't know all the factors of 110. But remember, if the middle number is a 1, what that means is our factors have to be right next to each other. Like back up here, see how this was a 30 and the middle number was 1? Our numbers had to be right next to each other, 6 and 5. Okay? So the numbers have to be right next to each other. So that tells me I'm going to use 11 and 10. Negative 11 times 10 is negative 110. Negative 11 plus 10 gives me negative 1. But again, take as much time as you need, run through as many factors, use your calculator. You'll eventually get there, okay? For these problems, it's really just perseverance. Like, keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. You might not get it on the first 2, 3, 4 tries, but eventually you will get it if you keep trying. So negative 11, so a minus 11. Positive 10, a plus 10. There's my final answer. All right, number 9. 9 and 10 are difference of two squares. So what that means is, again, remember, with difference of two squares or dots, this tells you what questions to ask. Is it a difference? Yes, that means subtracting. Yes, there's a subtraction there. Do I have two terms? Yes, v squared and 1. Like these problems had 3, a squared, a, and 110. It had 3 terms. These have two terms, v squared and 1. Are they both perfect squares? Yes, v squared is a perfect square, and 1 is a perfect square. It's 1 times 1. Once we know that, we are ready to jump right into our problem. No table needed. First term, what times itself gives you v squared? Well, that's v times v. What times itself gives you 1? Well, that's 1 times 1. 1's a positive, 1's a negative. And that's it. You're done. That's all you have to do for those dots, difference of two squares problems. Unless you get a problem like number 10, where we say, all right, let's look at my 3 questions. Is it a difference? Yes. Is it a subtraction? Are there 2 terms? Yeah, 8m squared and 50. Are they both perfect squares? Well, let's look at this. M squared is a perfect square. That's good. But how about 8? There's no integer that you can multiply by itself to get 8. Not 4 times 4, that's 16. And how about 50? Same thing there. There's no number that you can multiply by itself to get 50. So that means we have a GCF. So what is the biggest number that we can divide out of 8 and 50? 2. So divide the 2 out. 8 divided by 2 is 4, m squared. 50 divided by 2 is 25. And now let's ask ourselves these questions again. Is it a difference? Well, yeah, that didn't change. Are there 2 terms? Yeah, that didn't change either. Are they both perfect squares? Is 4 a perfect square? Yeah, it's 2 times 2. How about 25? Is that a perfect square? Yes, 5 times 5. All right, so now we're ready to write our final answer. Bring the 2 down, and then 2 sets of parentheses. There's 1 set. There's another set. What times itself is 4? Well, that's a 2. What times itself is m squared? That's an m. So that's going to be attached to the 2. So 2m goes first in both of them. 25 is 5 times 5. And the other thing I want to remind you, well, first of all, 1 positive and 1 negative. The other thing I want to remind you is that when you're doing the difference of two squares, your stuff in the parentheses will be identical except for your sign. One will be positive and one will be negative. So just keep that in mind that when you're doing the difference of two squares, the stuff in your parentheses have to look identical except one is negative and one is positive. It doesn't matter which one. We could have made this one positive and this one negative. That doesn't matter. So there's your final answer for number 10. Okay? So again, like I said, I'm not going to be in today unexpectedly. I'll be out. So if you have any questions on any of these, watch them again. Send me an email or a private comment and let me know. You will still have your quiz tomorrow, so make sure you're ready for that. So if you have any questions, just make sure that you send me an email and let me know which problem it is that you don't understand, and I will try to go over it in a little more detail for you and try to answer those questions. So just let me know if you have any questions.